Hello, my friend, and welcome to Peaceful Prosperity. I'm your host, Oliver Manalesa. It's good to be with you today. I wanted to have a conversation with you about something that I don't feel like gets talked about often enough. And that's when you're in the process of building something that you had once only dreamed of. And just as it's starting to succeed, a deeper part of you feels completely starved. And this is exactly what happened to me. When I was 19 years old, I was reconnected with my entrepreneurial aspirations. And it woke me up and it had me reading and attending seminars and doing workshops and trainings and developing this circle of friends that all revolved around becoming a real estate investor. And I was really thinking that I was one of the lucky ones at such an early age, realizing what my destiny is. And in my early 20s, I started my first company. It was a rent to own investment company. And I started with my best friend. And we were full of creativity, full of passion, full of excitement. And with the help of one of our mentors, we were able to start getting some early success. And this thing that was once just an idea in my head started to be realized in terms of results being delivered and money in our pockets and actually being able to be full-time entrepreneurs. And that part was so exciting. It was so incredible to be able to say, like, wow, we are making a living. We're actually paying our bills with something that we created. And I remember having this feeling like I'll never have to work for somebody ever again. And I'm so thankful for that gift. Now, a couple of years in to this business, we were starting to build a name for ourselves, and we were growing our network, and we were having a lot of opportunities that were starting to come in our direction because of the reputation that we had built. And so things were starting to work. And not only that, we started to become even more thoughtful about how we operated our business and who we actually worked with, that we were able to streamline things to be able to free up even more of our time. So not only were we finally full-time entrepreneurs, we were finally developing a lifestyle business where we were starting to take ownership of our time. And so things were working, and yet I couldn't help but feel this growing sense of restlessness build up inside me. And I didn't know it at the time, but this was something that was going to fester and grow and completely shift what I thought my destiny was, what I thought my path was. Because at a soul level, I was not feeling nurtured. I was not feeling nourished. Not the same way that I was when I was filled with creativity and passion and innovation at the outset of this business. And what I did was what I feel like the typical high achiever, the typical productive person, the action oriented person will do. And I went back to the things that brought me to life in the past. I tried to reinvigorate some of that energy. I went back to the conferences. I went back to the seminars. I reread those old books. I had conversations with those friends who were able to hype me back up about my business and help me remember, look at what you are building and you're just getting started. Look what's ahead of you. And it would give me a beautiful boost, but it would end up lasting a few days or even a few weeks at best. But I'd fall right back down to the place of where I was, looking around and being like, wow, we are doing well and things are moving in the direction that we were dreaming about and planning for. And yet, why does it still feel like something is missing? And so I felt incredibly confused. Like it really didn't make sense that I literally thought that I had my shit together. I thought I had my future figured out. And yet here's this internal conflict. Here's the war within that was brewing inside of me, where we're starting to succeed on the outside, but on the inside, there was friction and there was conflict. And I couldn't pinpoint what it was. Now, looking back, of course, there's so much perspective, but it was really, I had invested so much of my sense of self, my self-worth, my identity in this business. And I think that's what a lot of us end up doing. When we start to do well in a particular career, a field, a path, and we start to derive our sense of value from it, and our identity starts to be so much more enmeshed with it, that we start to realize, or we start to lose a sense that we are something far greater than that, that we are something apart from this job or from this title. And so for me, like, I was my business. I was a real estate investor. It was in my being. That's how I related with it. It felt like, why is this not clicking? Like, why am I feeling this lack of satisfaction and fulfillment when this is what I'd been wanting to create for myself for so many years? And I talk about this in my book, The Daily Prosperity Method, that I had gone through this crazy roller coaster where I got investigated by the governing body of realtors in my province. And I felt so exposed and so vulnerable, divulging all this information. And it put me into this emotional roller coaster filled with shame, because I had not done anything wrong, but it was pointing to the fact that there was something that was inauthentic about this entire path. And now, thank God, they didn't find anything wrong with how I was operating my business, but it was like a forced pause for me. It forced me to reflect on, like, why am I filled with this sense of embarrassment? Why am I filled with this sense of shame around this work, around this business that I had invested so much into, that I was all in on? And I was journaling in a notebook just like this. It was April 1st, I remember, and I was feeling like a fool and just completely emptying all of my thoughts and my emotions, this mess inside of me, onto the page. And seemingly out of nowhere, I write, maybe I just don't give a shit about this business anymore. You know those truths that you admit to yourself, that the moment you write it down, the moment you say it out loud, you just can't take it back. That's what it felt like. It felt like this truth that had been trying to emerge for like a year, through all this restlessness, through all this distraction, through all of this high achiever, toxic productivity habits. And here it was. I finally had the space to let this truth breathe, and I couldn't ignore it. I couldn't avoid it anymore. And there was this feeling like that just rushed over me, like this vibration, these goosebumps, this lightness. I even wrote about it afterwards. I'm like, why do I feel such peace? Why do I feel such relief in finally admitting this to myself? And this was this realization that it sent me on this path of just like feeling like unstoppable again. It almost gave me the courage to have difficult conversations and make difficult decisions again, to the point where within a week, I talked to my business partner and the investors we were working with and the referral partners that we had, and close down that company, that business that I was once all in on, completely shut it down. And so to me, it created this conversation within me where, do I continue to work on this business while I go figure out what I'm going to do next, even though I don't give a shit about it anymore, which felt completely inauthentic. And so there was really no question in my mind. I couldn't put on a facade. I think for a year I was putting on a facade and I didn't even realize it. You know, sometimes like we forget that we fall for our own lies, that we can deceive ourselves so well, so powerfully, that the truth can remain invisible to us. And that's exactly what happened to me. And that I just couldn't live with myself doing that. That's why I ended up closing down the business. And so what first felt like, oh, that's all finally off my shoulders, like I could finally step into a path of truth for myself. Even though I had that sense of relief, what I didn't really anticipate was the grief. My sense of self, my identity, my worth was so embedded, so enmeshed in this business that along with it, I vaporized that as well. You know, just think about times where you had let go of maybe a romantic relationship or a job or a title that you had been so attached to for so long, and then being in this vast open space that's so intimidating, so confronting, because it's like, who am I now? And that's essentially where I found myself. But I did have this true north, that I had this feeling of my gifts have a greater purpose, that my gifts are meant to be pointed in a different direction, that there's a higher calling for it. And so it sent me on this path of self-discovery, and it allowed me this space. It allowed me to kind of reimagine what my path was. When I thought I had the next 30 years figured out, now I have the opportunity to reinvent and kind of come back to it from a place of greater connection with who I am, with greater connection with what was true for me. And it was, I feel like the my intuitive sense, it led me on a direction of deepening my level of well-being, because I felt like, how am I supposed to unpack or ask these more profound questions about my life and my future if I don't have my energy, if I don't have access to my bandwidth? And it also led me to deepening my understanding and relationship with integrity, to acknowledge where my messes were, where my inauthenticities were, where I wasn't honoring myself, my boundaries, my values, on not honoring my word. And for some reason, that's what I felt called to. But I look back at it now and it makes so much sense, because without well-being, without integrity, how am I going to have greater access to my interior resources to attack the challenges, the obstacles, the opportunities that are in front of me that are coming up next? And these are, the practices and the principles. I talk a lot about this in my book, The Daily Prosperity Method. And so I think if we just take a pause for a moment, maybe you find yourself in your own version of this reality as well. Maybe you have you had a creative endeavor, something that was so passion filled, so you were so inspired by that, and it's working, and you have momentum, and you have maybe a life that you've built because of it, and God bless. But something isn't working. Even the fact that even though you are succeeding, something is at a soul level, it's not feeding you anymore. And in fact, maybe it's leaving you spiritually starved. And maybe you've been, like me, trying to hype yourself back up, trying to go back to the things that lit you back up, to bring the romance back in a way. But then eventually that spark keeps dying. And maybe that's God's way of trying to tell you that maybe this is the past. Maybe what's next for you is something new, something different, something reimagined. And so I invite you to consider that maybe the restlessness that is brewing inside of you isn't failure, but maybe it's truth trying to emerge. And what I know about truth is that it's only when we allow ourselves to find a place of stillness, where we let go of the busyness for a moment, that we avoid and abstain from the distractions just for a moment, and let that sensation of discomfort to communicate to us, because it's filled with this untapped, this energy and this information is trying to tell you something. Because for me, acknowledging this war within, it wasn't a sign necessarily that something was wrong. It was actually a sign that something deeper was calling for me, that something greater than I could even imagine was calling for me. And so it pointed me in the direction that ended up being the foundational steps and literally the origin story of what the past 13 plus years have been as a coach, as a yoga teacher, and serving as a guide to high achievers who have gone through this type of cycle, who are doing well, but they're at war with themselves. It was the beginning of my journey into coaching. Way before I even started to call myself a coach or even let myself declare the possibility of being a coach. I hadn't even connected those dots yet. So I'm so thankful that you took some time today to listen to a little bit of my story. And maybe you heard some parts of your story or your current reality in that as well. In this next video that I'm going to film for you, I'm going to share a little bit about what it was like to have, my identity be completely evaporated, and what it actually meant to me to walk away from something that was technically working and then step into possibility, not knowing what was ahead of me, not knowing what I was going to do next, but learning to trust that something greater was at work and what that actually led to and what that meant. So if you're interested in hearing more, I hope that you stick around, that you subscribe to the channel, that you subscribe to the podcast, and I look forward to connecting with you on the next video. Be well. Talk to you soon.